Welcome to the Spirit of Business episode number 45, The Creativity of Business, with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum.
Hi Sarah.
Hi Matt.
I want to reflect on something that we did yesterday. You and I had a session yesterday to talk about your business. And one of the things that I'm very conscious of when I'm talking about what to do next in a business and thinking about strategy and thinking about, what are we trying to create and where we're going and that sort of type thing, the direction. I think about two things. One is to ensure that whatever we're doing, I'm very focused around the personality of the business owner and applying the principles that I understand to be structured principles around business and about strategy. And so, because if I apply very structured principles to people that are very creative and unstructured, then that doesn't work very well in terms of getting a great outcome from a strategic conversation. So I have to adapt my process to ensure that it's appropriate for the way that people think and talk and act. And some of the things that we've spoken about before in terms of you and I is that you've struggled sometimes with being very clear about what goal and outcome you actually want to have, because when you do goals and outcome, it doesn't always actually work to the way you wanted to get to it. So we've spoken in previous podcasts around making sure that you're, that we don't get so linear around saying this is exactly where I want to get to and this is the process and the map we're going to get there on. And so one of the things that I want to talk about today on that basis is the word creativity, because I kind of saw a shift between our conversations that we're having about your business for the next 12 months, pre-Christmas and pre-break to sort of post-festive season break. And we had that session yesterday where we started to talk about where it is that we wanted to take the business for the next period of time, okay? And so I wanted to talk about this concept around the word creativity, because I think as business owners, we feel that we want to ensure that we're being creative in the moment to ensure that we are able to get to the momentum we want to get to and not being too rigid and structured, because that can hold us back from, taking opportunities as they arise. So I was very conscious yesterday in our conversation not to being too structured in our approach to working out the future direction of the business, to ensure that we didn't miss any of the creative opportunities and the solutions and the momentum that we can get by leveraging off ideas that might arise. So I also started to think about what's the opposite of creative. And when I started to look at definitionally, because you know that I like to go back to the dictionary and look at the meaning of words, was there an opposite to creative? And there kind of wasn't. a word that and that's why we're using the word structured to being maybe the opposite to creative. And then the other thing that I want to talk about today is in that there's two types of business owners. I think there's people that run businesses and own businesses, and I would classify as a business owner. And then there's entrepreneurs. And I would classify an entrepreneur as somebody who is constantly evolving and innovating businesses. So they would create another business and another business and another business sort of thing, or they continually evolve their own businesses in multiple directions. And I would say that Richard Branson is probably the best example of what I would classify as an entrepreneur, whereas there's other people that are running the same business consistently over and over again. Now, there's nothing wrong with either of them, but I think there's a distinction between entrepreneurism and business ownership around, and I think that the word creativity comes into that perspective. So I know that I've sort of opened up a very large topic to have a conversation about, but I just sort of think that they all sort of somehow come together when I'm talking about the word creativity and planning and directions and goal setting and the things that we were talking about yesterday for your business.
It's interesting. I want to open it up even a bit further because reflecting on the meeting that we had, there's a dynamic for me, and I think this will be probably many people will relate to this. There's a dynamic that creativity is definitely a part of it, and you're much more structured than I am, and I will always kind of flow over towards the creative end of things, to the point at times where it's not pathological, but it's not very healthy. You know, there are times when I'll use that as an excuse not to do the right thing rather than do the right thing. Just as I think at the other extreme, people can become so structured that they're unable to engage with creativity because it doesn't feel safe or they don't want to. But there was another dynamic, and I don't know whether this is a feminine, masculine one. It's partly that, definitely, but it's probably a bit beyond that. But I think it's worth talking about, because what was really clear for me is that you have certain structures and processes and formulae. We often joke about formulae, but you know, there are ways that these things work, and they're valid, absolutely. They're things that have been proven time and time again, and that's where the scientific side will tend to come in, and the rational side. But the interesting thing is that every time you try to sum something up into a formula, or we're now fitting the box, it was like something would freeze inside me, because I don't operate in that space very well. And so I learned a lot about myself, because I could see very clearly that I'm looking all the time to feel the outcome of something. And I'm looking to feel really good. And if it doesn't feel really good, or if I can't feel it, I can't relate to it. So sometimes I slowed down the meeting and I would say, I have to reflect on this, or I need some time. I'm literally trying to buy time to see if I can feel the idea that you're talking about. And it might be a brilliant idea, and it might be absolutely the right thing. But if I can't personally connect with it, I know that I can't put that into action. Or if I put it into action, that's where I don't get results. That's what I have really learned, is that it's not about whether I have a goal or not. It's about how do I relate to that goal. If there's something that feels really good to me, so that it's like all of me is saying, yes, I want that, then I naturally go towards it. But if it's got any of that element of, I ought to get there, that ought or should is never ever a good feeling. Or that's what people like me are supposed to do, is never ever a good feeling. So I realize that I operate all the time on this kind of very rich feeling world, and I need time for that. I've met many people recently who say that. They say that they grew up, one person grew up in New York, and she said it was just too much of a hurry and she needs time to process things. I think many women also, they operate on a different dynamic, and so a man can come in with all the right answers, but unless she connects with them, she can't do anything with those right answers. So they're not right until she's actually connected with them as well. So these dynamics of how we operate in the world and how different dynamics can work together, I think that's the very fascinating territory that we're touching on here.
And the thing that I reflect upon that is that you've taught me how to be more sensitive around sort of the feminine masculine energy, because without knowing it, I probably do have a masculine energy around business, in terms of, you know, this structured way of getting to where I want to get to. And this is the formula. And if I do this, I'll do that, I'll do this, I'll get to the result that I need to get to. So I understand exactly what you're talking about. But one thing I do want to also reflect on too is that masculine and feminine doesn't necessarily define male female, though, does it? From the perspective that, so I can have feminine energy in the way that I approach something, even though I'm a man, for example.
Absolutely, and I have quite a lot of masculine energy, but that's why I wasn't sure if feminine masculine was even the right polarity to be drawing on, but it was the closest I could get in terms of this. But this feeling, maybe that's a feeling as compared with a thinking. Maybe it's more about that.
I definitely felt that yesterday, that I would come up with probably a task or an activity to say, hey, this is going to get us closer to where you want to get to from a direction perspective. And you would say to me that, yes, I understand it, but I need to time to process it and feel it and know that it is the right direction to, not direction, but probably the right how of going about it to
For
get
me, it's about
to
the
the,
it's about the consciousness. It's
yeah.
always, and what I mean by that is that when I can feel like if I make a decision that's based on what's going to be good for my business, it always feels like an unconscious decision. Unless I've thought about what's going to be good for the client and good for my business. Like, I need to go through the process of always thinking about the parties who are involved and fully getting that. If somebody makes a suggestion to me, and I didn't realize what was happening for years, people would make me all these suggestions about what I should do with my business that were good for my business. And they never mentioned the client. I'm not talking about you here. It was always
Mhm.
about me, and it always felt really empty. And I discovered that I need to really, really connect. It's like I need to feel the emails that I would send to a person. I don't need to have the words, but I need to feel the tone. Like, is this something that would be really amazing for them and amazing for me? Because if it isn't, it feels like there's half of it missing. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm processing it to feel like, oh, so where's this piece that we're not really talking about yet? How do I fill all of this out so that it becomes something that could actually work in the way that I want it to work?
And I thought that yesterday was good because what we were talking about is connecting that, is looking at it saying, what is it that you would like to achieve, okay, in terms of your business, and not down to very sort of numbers orientated, linear sort of type, um, I suppose, structured way of defining goals and directions. It was saying, hey, this is kind of the feeling that I want to have, and this is the impact that I want to have, and this is where I want to get to, and this is the tool that I've got or the product that I have that actually enables that. And so then what we're really doing is creating an experience for the people that will engage with your business that actually gives you the result that you want to have. And that was the goal. That was which, because you need a direction. You just can't. One
Absolutely.
end of the spectrum is just ad hoc, just responding to whatever actually happens on a daily basis is one end of the spectrum, and just being completely rigid and structured down the other end of the spectrum where it's been completely defined from here for the next 5 years. Okay, so that is too structured and rigid, and being ad hoc and reactionary is too the other way. So there has to be something that meets this balance in the middle. And if you said that masculinity was this very structured end of the spectrum, and you had the femininity around the being very reactionary, if that's the continuum or the line that we're talking about there, what we're trying to do is find this nice balance between the two things that actually creates the moment, or it gets leveraged off the moment and doesn't lose the moment to get the direction of we're going to. And that's what we were really exploring yesterday. And I know that I wasn't very articulate with what I just sort of said there, but hopefully that maybe you can clean that up for me.
Well, there's something that I've gradually learned, and I'm still learning, is that or if I work with somebody who's very different from me in that way, and if we can find a solution that satisfies both of us, really satisfies both of us, it's not a compromise, it's the opposite of a compromise. It's kind of like, yeah, you're totally up for it and I'm totally up for it. Then we actually transcend that polarity. We don't meet in the middle, we actually go to a different level. I worked with somebody last year on my brand, and I call her the queen of spreadsheets, because every meeting, she had a spreadsheet, she had a proposal, she had a procedure, and she would check off the boxes, and we knew exactly where we were. And she was phenomenally structured, and it drove me crazy in a way, but I chose to work with her deliberately because I knew that if I worked with somebody who completely agreed with my way of thinking, we would basically reproduce more of my way of thinking. But if I could satisfy her and me, actually what happened is we created something that was kind of bigger than either of us. And I think that's really what we're talking about here as well. And I look at the notes that I wrote yesterday, and there's just one idea we came up really fast. And it's one of those where I know that you wouldn't have come up with it and I wouldn't have come up with it, either of us on our own. And it kind of flashed out of this slightly uncomfortable, even, it's not always comfortable, these two different energies working together. But it kind of flashed out of that. And when I look at it, it's like, oh my goodness, that solves so many things at so many levels. That's what I think of as a transcendent solution. It's actually a solution at the different level, which makes many of the problems we had at the lower level not relevant anymore, or they don't really exist anymore.
What that did was it provided direction. Because once we had a direction, then we were able to then map out the pathway to get focused on going down a particular path. So we're not just being ad hoc and responsive to everything that might come up, that we're actually saying, okay, because what happens if you're too responsive and ad hoc is that you get distracted. Okay. And business owners that get distracted, yes, they could possibly come across something that from a creativity perspective, but then they need the discipline of actually carrying through something. And I see this time and time again with business owners where they don't get enough structure and discipline in taking that creative solution or idea that you talked about, that higher direction that came up with yesterday, to then make that the goal and then make that happen. So once we'd actually set that as a pathway, as a direction, then we started to look and saying, well, what are the steps to actually get there? And when we spent the rest of the session really talking about those steps, and I put it into my logical formula of the quadrant around sort of, how you actually are able to, fulfill and get more people to have the experience of the impact. And we spoke about the activities around that sort of stuff. But when we're going through that activities, that's when you sort of kick back in again and said, well, I need time to process this. I can't feel whether this is the right activity or the right solution to get me towards that particular direction. And then we had to come from different angles to say, but what if it felt like this, or what if we did it that particular way? Yes, we could approach it in that particular way. So we had to do some exploration and creative thought to make the two ends of the spectrum, where we talk about the structured and the creative, to come together to get a better feeling solution. Is the way that I felt the conversation went.
So for me, this is really interesting. It's kind of interesting to see the two different dynamics, actually. For me, it was more like we put in place a direction, which we both agreed about, that because of that, it enabled a creative, like a really brand new idea to come out. That because there's a container, creativity actually needs a container, and we often forget that. And if you have a container or a direction or an alignment that, like, this is what we're doing, there's actually tremendous scope for creativity then. I write emails every week, and I can be as creative as I like with my emails because I know what the purpose is. But if I can just write anything and everything and it really doesn't matter and there's no purpose, actually the creativity diminishes to a certain extent. So that my experience was, by agreeing on a direction, it enabled a spark, like a creative spark, to come out of that solved a whole lot of things for me. Maybe nobody else even really noticed or cared, but I know in my own mind that there was something very powerful in what we came up with as a result. Yes, so it is this a sort of friction that happens that creates a spark, I think, and that's why it's really important to talk about this, because it's important not to just work with people who operate the same way as you do, because you don't have any friction. But it's the friction of, like, I was having to, on the one hand, like, really listen to you and accept what you were suggesting, and at the same time have integrity to what I need. And it's not like just me, just what I need, you have to serve me. And it's not just do it your way because I have to serve you and I have to go very fast if you want me to go fast. It's like both and. I need to respect and follow what you're bringing to the meeting, and I need to respect and follow what I'm bringing to the meeting. And that's actually not an easy thing to do, especially if you're the slow one, because I always feel like, oh, I shouldn't, I can think very fast, but I can't feel very fast. And so I have to take time.
there, though. I think the word that you use there is the word respect. You're going to respect your own wishes and respect the other person. And it's got to be a two-way street in regard to respect. So when you're doing those conversations, um, the friction's a good thing, okay, as you say, and I like that there is this friction or tension, but it shouldn't be in an environment that feels closed off or disrespected. And
No,
so,
because then you get frustration and often really bad behavior in business, which I've seen.
correct, and I see that a lot. That they say, oh, you should be in board meetings. There should be more debate, and there should be more arguments, and that creates a great environment for creativity. I find that yes, I understand the concept of it, but I often see it done in a very disrespectful, egotistical way that doesn't really get the outcome that we're talking about, where it's where, and I think the secret sauce or the secret recipe for having what you talked about before, taking to a higher level where the sum of the two parts doesn't make two, it actually makes three or five, because you're getting that extra layer of leverage because you've got that friction, that tension, but you're doing it in a very respectful, um, caring sort of type way, where you're really looking for the best outcome for everybody's interest. And I
Yeah,
think
and
that
that's
that's
actually
really important.
that's a very big thing. It's a very big thing to do that, because there's always a temptation to just be annoyed with the other person. It's like, why don't you do things the way I do? Or to
Mm.
actually look down on another person, literally, to look down on them because they're not. I see a lot of women do this. These guys, they just don't understand feminine energy. It's not that. We need both. And then men or more masculine energies, it's like they don't have any time for this sort of more formless, softer kind of energy. But actually, there really is something powerful in both. Or the creative people who never really achieve anything because no one ever puts structure around it. Or the structured people who could just do with some more ideas and having some creativity around them, but they don't like creative people. So we really need to respect each other at quite a deep and I think very explicit level. I think there needs to be an absolutely explicit desire to create something together and to respect each other in that process, and to really listen to the other person and understand them, and also to really listen to yourself, because many people will dismiss their own thoughts or their own feelings and say, oh, this person's the chairman, or this person's the boss, or this person's the whatever. So I shouldn't say what I think in case I look stupid. But I think we need to be able to say things that might make us look stupid, but are sincere.
Yeah, I agree. And what I was saying when I was talking about the opening statement around this podcast was that you've got to come to this environment, because I'm very conscious of the way that you operate and the way you think. And so I came in thinking I'm going to have to approach it this particular way, in a very feminine sort of energy way, or very creative, unstructured sort of type way, without my typical, okay, what do we want to achieve and where we're going and what's the outcome and how we're going to get there and da 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 and all the stuff that you would go, whoa, what's going on there? Um, and coming in completely opposite to that. And you funny because you came in and said, okay, I've got an idea, here's the direction I want to go in, and then we're off and running. So it was quite funny, the dynamic. We almost traded places, I think. But I think the reason I say that is because of the respect that we would have for each other, in terms of wanting to making sure that person's way that they would go about it was hugely respected.
It's much more dynamic. It takes much more energy to respect. Um, in my experience, it's much more dynamic. It's much more alive. It's much more fulfilling, actually. It's a much more fulfilling experience. But you can't be apathetic about it. You can't be lazy. You can't respect in a lazy way. It really takes energy and commitment to respect somebody else, especially when they're saying things in a way that you don't particularly agree with, or you don't understand, or it's like, well, that's not my language. And sometimes I feel like I can say me as well, like I'm so selfish in my own little loop. I want everyone to speak my language. And yet, I've been in that experience actually when I was younger, where everyone around me spoke my language. Somehow, everyone, all my friends, we all agreed about things. And I remember feeling really somehow cut off and bored in the end. And I went into a totally alien environment, which was a workshop with a couple of guys working in there. Didn't know anything at all about the things I was interested in. And I remember this breath of fresh air. That's what diversity to me is all about. It's that fresh air of, we don't all agree and we have different perceptions, and you can take that as something annoying, or you can take it as something intriguing and curious and interesting. And that's really what makes the difference. I think it makes for a very different life, actually.
And the word that just kept popping up then when you're talking then is a creative life. It's a creative environment. You talked about it being in a vessel before, and you say, that you need to have some sort of boundaries and structures around the vessel, being that's the outer layer of it, to ensure that there's this creative environment that happens inside of the vessel, to ensure that you're still on going towards a particular direction or particular purpose or a particular outcome, but it's not just completely free of any structure or any discipline or any sort of focus associated with it. And I suppose that's the trick. And that was what we were trying to do yesterday, is respect that we need to go in a particular direction and have a certain sort of outcome or principle associated with that, but not lose sight of the ability to say, hey, we need to be creative in solving for where we want to get to, because a lot of things in business are not solvable, right? Or we haven't been solved before. And so we've been having to have creative solutions because things that we've tried in the past haven't worked. So we have to come up with new solutions. And that's where the creativity comes from to get the result that we want to get to. And that's really what we're exploring yesterday, from my
The other
perspective.
thing I noticed, I think it's just part of my brand in a way, perhaps because it's part of my character, is that if I don't innovate, if I don't keep bringing new energy into what I'm doing, it's very difficult for me to repeat things at a certain level, because it's funny, people just don't respond anymore because they expect a certain level of creativity from me. Now that would not be the same for all businesses. If you go to an online shop, you want to know that you're going to be able to get the thing that you want to get, and there's a balance in there. But I've noticed that every time I've dropped off on the kind of innovation and creativity piece, there's an immediate response from my clients and my audience. So I need to keep that creative edge all the time, and at the same time be able to have the discipline to keep the direction.
It's interesting that there's clearly two types of products or services in the world: those that we don't want to change, and those that we do want to change.
Well, there are people,
Um,
maybe different types of people. There are the people who is it, Seth Godin calls them neophiliacs, people who are
right.
obsessed with whatever's new. They're the early adopters. And then there are
Yeah.
the people who are obsessed with getting whatever it is they want to get, and they're in the mainstream. So I think that I naturally appeal more to the neophiliacs, the early adopters. And that's appropriate for a business at my level, where I'm operating. I'm going to need to start with those kinds of people who want to do something a bit different, looking for something new. Um, Maybe one day it will be mainstream, who knows? But I don't think we're there yet.
But that's interesting that you talk about that, because there's still, I think, a large proportion of people out there that want the same. So therefore, you're talking about appealing to one type of personality, but really, you know, I think that there's a lot of people that actually want that stability of sameness rather than sort of being on the leading edge of a lot of things. And so this is where um, creativity, like I think replication of the same is seen to be non-creative, because you're not really evolving and innovative and all that sort of type of stuff. You're just doing exactly the same thing. And and food stuff is something that you go and buy because you know you're going to get the same sort of type experience from it, and
It
that's
makes
what you
great
want.
businesses, doesn't it?
It makes great businesses. And
Yeah.
then the innovative stuff, like, I just held up my mobile phone a second ago that, if we're still using the iPhone 4, so to speak, or that we'd be going, we want more. This is not where we're at. We want change. We don't want to be the same. So it's really interesting, and it depends on, I suppose, the product and service that we're offering is about the level of creativity that's required. Because in your business, there needs to be a lot of creativity to keep evolving. However, there's also a fundamental stability of sameness that people want the same thing, which is because, in your business, a lot of it is around replication of, relaxation and energy and meditation, and those sorts of things are very non-creative, I suppose, in the way that they are received. You're always looking for more creative ways of delivering it, or to keep people interested. But there is a sameness there, and I think that this is what's the opposite to creativity. Maybe we're trying to work out before, but is it sameness? Is the thing, and then there's this sense of comfort in sameness as well.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe it's predictability to some extent that there's something that feels secure. And clearly, the more we talk about it, it becomes really clear that there's always a balance in those. I think it's also important to talk about the fact that some of the stuff about creativity, the entrepreneurs that I work with, I see that there's often an attachment to the idea of creativity. It's almost like an addiction. And I can see that sometimes. I think in myself, it's almost like if I'm not being creative, I'm not a human being. I'm not worth anything. But actually that's a very misleading feeling, and it's not accurate. That's feeding an itch or feeding a kind of hole in your soul, really, when you get driven by this, like, I've got to do something, I've got to have another idea. You're not looking at reality very clearly any longer when you get like that. So I think sometimes we do it just to feed something in ourselves, and that it can often be going too far. In business, it seems to work better to look at what's actually happening, and let's see, where do we need creativity, where do we need predictability, where do we need stability, where do we need a bit of life and dynamism and something that's going to surprise people. And all the time there's a blending of these. And so what we're really talking about what we're really talking about is synergy. How do we create synergy rather than just saying, okay, well, this bit's going to be predictable and this bit's going to be creative. So rather than trying to structure our creativity, how do we create this kind of synergy where the whole thing lifts? And it's like, oh, wow, we could never have done that if we didn't have these different perspectives.
And I was thinking about the word balance, but I think the word synergy is better
More
in
powerful.
terms of it's more powerful because it's kind of taking it to another level, and it's things being in sync and alignment together, because you're talking about things that are potentially opposites in terms of when you say about predictability compared to creativity, and some of the other words you use there were great words, but they are kind of in conflict with each other because they're the opposite. But when you actually put them together and you can align them and become in sync and have synergy there, then that's when you can see how everything can lift. And there's probably a principle in that. Not too sure what it be defined. I'm sure it's been defined before as a principle. But it's a great way to think about it, because really what we've been talking about today is all these things that are opposites that are going on in your business that we're trying to grapple with and determine ends of spectrum and masculine and feminine and creativity and sameness and all that sort of type thing. And we're trying to put them somehow in some sort of order to get a good result.
Well, maybe you are.
Well,
You're trying to do that because I'm trying to create chaos here. There's something though that
herding cats is the other statement that I've used a lot of the time.
what was that? Herding cats?
herding cats, trying to
Herding
get
cats.
cats to all, because it's impossible to do.
Every one of these podcasts is a herding cats experience, I reckon. But there is something that I think is very important, because it's actually very significant that when you tried to find the opposite of creativity, you couldn't find, there wasn't really a word for the opposite of creativity. There were lots of words that were very kind of negative words, but they're not the opposite, or they're not at the other end of the range or the polarity from creative. They're just negative words. And what just occurred to me, and I think this is actually so fundamental, is that we have this rather lazy notion of creativity, of being the person who has the ideas. Creativity is having ideas. Creativity is actually creating things. So the person who goes and puts stuff into the business that enables clients to be able to buy the same thing day after day after day after day is as creative as the person who has the brilliant product idea in the first place. Because that brilliant product will not go anywhere unless it's put into the form of a business with marketing, with all the disciplines and structures around it that enable it to be supplied to people who want to buy it. So we have this thing like that entrepreneurial flair is a very creative person. The reason why Richard Branson stands out is because he doesn't just have ideas, he does stuff. He gets things done, his businesses work. But for most of us, probably and for him especially, he always talks about how it's the people. He puts really good people around him. So creativity is creating something. It's not having an idea, and therefore that person who, in our polarity idea, appears to be less creative, more at the other end, is actually just as creative as the person who has the ideas. And I think that's actually the real synergy here. Is it takes practical, it takes kind of visionary, it takes many different poles to create and produce something reliably and supply it to lots and lots of people.
You just explained something that has been a thing in a different way in my life. So in the business that I ran for many, many years, with my business partner, he was very good at being the person that came up with the idea. And he was probably celebrated for being that person who came up with the idea. We celebrate the person who, wow, that was a creative idea. Wow, you're sort of the ideas man. You're seen as a bit of a genius, so to speak, in terms of coming up with the idea. I spent most of my life then working out how to actually commercialize that idea and bring it to, as you say, bring it to the physical being of actually running the business and creating the business. So I probably wasn't seen to be the genius in that situation, but you needed the two things. You needed the person who had the spark, as you called it, but then you needed the person that's able to take that spark and look at it and assess it and throw it up in the air and mold it and make it into something that's actually going to work commercially in business that can be replicable and sold over and over again to create a business, so to speak. So I certainly think that's good.
Yeah, it's creating a business. It's not all about products. So you're actually creating a business, and creating a business that sells products or sells services. That's where the real creativity of business ownership lies, is in creating the business. And it takes so many different skills to do that. So you are absolutely a creator just as much as the crazy visionaries.
I just sort of, and I think the word commercialization, okay, comes into that statement, is that you're commercializing the crazy ideas. And we've spent most of our lives, especially in the accounting industry that I'm in, that looks after the clients we have, which is very heavily in the R&D space, is actually sitting with the nutty professional or the mad scientist, as we affectionately know them, and say, okay, well, that's a great idea and it's very novel and unique, but is there a commercial market and pathway that's actually going to create this into a business? And that's where the art and the science comes together.
Yeah, exactly. So we have creativity and synergy all wrapped up in one nice little parcel with a bow on it.
Yeah,
it feels really good. I'm happy to have a synergistic creative business that's actually creating things that actually reach lots of people.
I think that we can make a Dr. Seuss book out of this particular thing too. The amount of words that we've strung together that are difficult to say. So I think that's been really good conversation from where it started. Like all these podcasts do, is that we start with a thought process and a concept or an experience that we've had recently, and really analysed it and unpacked it to then work out what it is and how can we get a better experience or a better result from that event or experience the next time we see how this is going to occur.
And there's something I want to say about it, because it's been on my mind often recently. Usually when people record things, they often want to bring their formula for something. So, it looks like we should have had a podcast about synergy, and we've got synergy sorted out. We know what it is, and so we're going to introduce the idea and then say this is synergy and this is how it works and this is what you get from it. And that's all kind of cool, except that synergy, for example, or creativity are actually very, very alive experiences. And they don't happen in a box. They don't happen with a little bow on them and all packaged up. They happen between real people and real situations, and a great level of unpredictability of life, actually. And so for me, that's very important to understand about what we're doing here. Is we do sort of come up with some answers, and they might not always be spot on, and somebody else might have a much better definition of synergy. But the point is, how do we create the synergy as we're talking about it in the recording of it? How do we be what we're talking about at the same time? How do we explore it from the inside? Not just saying, I've got this, I'm the expert, and I'm going to deliver it to you. Because I feel then that we can actually share the exploration together, and it will stimulate people listening to go to take the discussion further rather than take a delivery. And that feels very important, because life feels a lot more alive when we live this way.
I agree, and I think that that's the power of this conversation, and because it empowers other people to then take what we're talking about and think of it from their perspective and get something from that they'll add to. Or they'll have a different version or view of it as well. And that's what I love about these conversations. It's something that happened yesterday I found mildly amusing from this conversation was that you and I had spoken for probably about, 2 hours maybe about some stuff. And Nico, your husband, was there. And we came up with a great solution we thought at the end of it. He said, well, why didn't you say that, 2 hours ago? I'm gone, mate, it doesn't work like that.
I say that to him, it doesn't work like that, but sometimes for him it does. He can just see it straight away, but he doesn't say. So that's another thing. What about the noisy people and the quiet people? That's another dynamic.
There you go. But I think that the reason why I brought that up is because sometimes the solution comes from just having the opportunity to have these creative conversations.
Yeah, and it's fun. Life is fun then. Okay, well, that's very cool. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you for listening to The Spirit of Business with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum. We'll be back next week with another episode. You'll find the show notes with links and other useful information on our website, spiritofbusiness.live. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends.